Excellent. So we have a jam-packed Parsha. As I was saying, Parsha Ba'alotcha is the crossroads for the end of the Torah. As we've been talking about in the past, really through the end of Shemot, the Torah has taken a detour, right? The goal was to leave the land of Israel, leave Egypt, get the Torah, and go into the land of Israel. One glorious march in a short period of time. We get to Har Sinai, we get the Torah, and then unfortunately we have the endeavor, the misadventure of the golden calf. And there's moments of having to manage that. And then whether the Mishkan's built in response or in tandem with that, but we finally get to a point where God is resting within the people again, and we're ready to travel. And then we get Vayikra, which is kind of the guidebook to how to be a holy, priestly community and nation. And then we get Bamidbar, as we've seen so far, and I actually, the italics in the outline are the general themes of things that we've seen in the last Parsha, beginning of Bamidbar. So you kind of see the lineup, right? We have the census in the desert. Of course, that was important for us to know who was where and where they're going to be marched and how many people are connected and who's going to be the force for the people moving forward. We have the consecration of the Levium, right? They play a critical role in ministering in the Mishkan and actually breaking it down and taking it out and traveling with it. We're going to see today a little bit more insight into that. Then we have how we actually encamp in the desert. And really that's also a forerunner for the march to Israel, but also once we're in Israel, right, how long that would take, when they do get to Israel. It takes 14 years to conquer and divide the land of Israel. On a more miraculous trend, that might take a little bit faster, but still they needed a basic encampment. There's a different roles for the temple service, again, augmenting what we need to know so that they can function within the land. It's the purification of the camp, the inauguration of the altar. We're ready to move forward. The menorah, which is the final stages of the construction of the Mishkan, the actual consecration of the Levium process, which we will talk about. Then we get Pesach Sheni, right? That there's a second opportunity to get Pesach. That just happens in the concordance of what we're talking about in terms of timing. Then we get the trumpets in our Parsha, that Moshe needs to make trumpets, and the divine marching orders, the signals of why we have trumpets. This is actually a bit of debate of why we have trumpets, why we blow shofar. Is it a form of prayer? Is it a form of stage direction, right? When you hear two trumpets march to the left, and two trumpets march to the right, type of thing. Or maybe it's all together. And then you have the marching orders, right? This is how you march, this is how you travel. And all of this is this very frenetic, moving forward pace towards actually traveling. And finally, you have in the middle of our parsha this conversation between Moshe and Yitro. There's a debate over when this actually happens. Does this happen closer to Har Sinai or now? But either way, the reason why it's here is because it fits so appropriately with the text of what we're talking about, right? Moshe says to Yitro, Nosim anachnu, we are traveling. We are going to the land of Israel. Are you with us? Are you coming with us, right? That's the last stage. Everything has been packed, right? Now you got to talk to the last neighbors. Are you coming with us or not? The Aron begins to travel 3 days, and then you have the backwards nuns. And the backwards nuns are the sign for us that things have gone a little bit awry. And as you see, I'm going to jump down to the source, to section number 4. Our rabbis talk. So what are we talking about, these backwards nuns? Are we familiar with that? This is the beautiful thing about Zoom. I can show you a picture of it. Right? Do people know what I'm talking about when I say these backwards nuns?
Yes.
Have you ever seen them?
Yes.
Is that a yes or no?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. So we have these backwards nuns in the Torah that are kind of almost they're not red. They are essentially a demarker of space around the verses Vayibn so Aaron and the verses that follow that. And it actually makes up its own parsha. in and of itself. Let's see. How do I make this big?
You have the stone edition. It's on page 786.
Right, but that's in the Chumash. Can you see what I'm sharing now? Do you see, what do you see? The Wikipedia page?
No, we're back to your.
Yeah, we see it for a moment, and you're clicking away from it. Yeah, there you go.
You're back? You see it?
Yes.
Wow.
So you see it's over here.
Yep.
And Vayihi ben Soaron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem, Ve'yafutzu oivecha, ve'yanusu misanecha, mipanecha, umnucha yomar, Shuva Hashem, Revot, Alfei Yisrael. It's kind of frozen in time. And Rabbi Soloveitchik points out, we're not gonna discuss this today. I think we've discussed in the past that this is kind of the frozen march song for the Jewish people, that we're about to move forward, and that this was going to be the theme as we enter the land of Israel, and there's going to be this unbelievable, miraculous moment with God and the Jewish people, and we'll be able to come umnucha, when God rests properly in the land of Israel. And that gets taken away, and that we're not able to accomplish that because there are all these mistakes that get made. We have, we'll continue to read about them over the next couple of weeks. We'll read about the complainers. We'll read about the issues with the Sanhedrin that come, and then you have these people prophesizing in the camp. You have the quail, people yearning for meat, and then complaining about the meat. You have Miriam who. And Aaron, the story where they speak, or Miriam speaks poorly of Moshe and the consequences they have. And then going into the next week's Parsha, we have the spies. You have the failed attempt to enter the land of Israel after the spies, after the Jews are denied. Then you have collecting wood on Shabbat, Moshe hitting the rock. Situation after situation where we see that the state of the Jewish people, that the Jewish people have in some ways grown too quickly, that they're not yet mature enough to make this step. And so we read through the rest of Bamidbar and the rest of Jewish history, where what should have been that year becomes 40 years of wandering and becomes a whole new generation entering the land of Israel under a whole new set of contexts and a new leadership and a new foundation and a whole new piece to Jewish history that kind of comes awry at our Parsha. And there's the early part of the Parsha, which is still this beautiful, energetic, destiny-driven march forward towards the land of Israel. And then the Vayimtza Rome that kind of catches that energy, that excitement, that pace, and freezes it. And then we see why we weren't ready for that at that time. And that's kind of the overview for the book, the overview for the moment, the overview for our Parsha. And why that is. And one of the things I would suggest as we read the Parsha this week is, what is the common thread, if there is one? And we'll talk about it next week. So I'll give people a week to think about it. What is the common thread between all these episodes of backsliding? That is there a common thread that weaves them together? Or is it just, chaos and mistake and haphazard challenge after haphazard challenge? I'm going to go with the first category, that there's a thread, some fatal flaw that the Jewish people need to still learn that weaves all these incidences together. But I'll let you decide that. So that is the big picture of our Parsha, and what we read about this week. It's interesting to note, for those who have been joining us for Mincha Marv, that the Vayihi ben Aaron, this idea that it's kind of frozen and set aside, actually has halachic ramifications. The Gemara describes it as its own book of the Torah. Someone asks you, how many books of the Torah is there? The answer is
5.
Machlokas. It's a debate. Some people said 5, but the Talmud also says that there are 7. There's Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, and Devarim. That's 4. And then you have the first part of Bamidbar, which is the book in of itself. You have the middle part of Bamidbar, Vayihi ben Aaron, these small set of letters that we have over here. and then you have the end of Bamidbar, and that is a total of how many books? 7. And the it's based on a verse in Mishlei or Tehillim. I don't remember right now off the top of my head. I think it's Chafsa Amudeha Shiva that the carpenter the quarrier hewed out 7 amudim, 7 pillars, 7 columns, and the Gemara says over there. From here we know that there are 7 books of the Torah. So we have this notion of that there are these multiple books of the Torah, that there are different ones, and they have halachic ramification. So, for example, what is the smallest amount if you have a Sefer Torah that's written and that the letters are erased? What's the smallest amount, the minimal amount that this Torah still has characteristics of a Torah? If it has the letters that are Vayhim Soaron, which I don't remember off the top of my head, I think it was like 48. It is a Mishnah in the tractate of Yadzayim, which I believe is not at my desk anymore because we are no longer. Oh, here it is. We were studying it. We completed it during the time between Pesach and Shavuot. The Mishnah writes that if you have a Torah that is erased and that they left Shmonin v'chamish otiot, has 85 letters, Kiparsha Vayibin Soaron, like the verses of Vayibin Soaron, like those parts, so that is still considered the minimal amount for a Torah scroll and still maintains the holiness of a Torah. So we see there's actually halachic ramifications to these nuns and the midrashic component that creates. So that is our point for the moment. Moving forward, so our parsha begins with the story of the altar picks up with the story from last week of the inauguration of the altar. Right, you have the Nesiim, the leaders of the tribes, each bring their sacrifice. Their sacrifice is exactly the same, one after the other. Everyone can still see the screen?
I'm sorry?
Everyone can still see the screen?
Yeah.
All right. So you pick up, and so we read that in this week's Bahalotcha al HaNeirot, El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Ye'iru Shivat Neirot, that when Aaron goes up to the light the menorah, he should kindle the menorah. So where does this come up? What does this have to do with anything? Right? Why is this connected in our parsha? So Rashi famously points out, Lama Nismecha Parsha HaMenorah, the Parsha Nesiim. Why are these two components paired together? Lefi Shekishira Aaron Chanukat Hanesiim Chashla. I'm sorry. When Aaron saw the inauguration of the princes for the altar in last week's parsha, 12 days, each highlighting each one of them, he became chalash. He became weak. He was disheartened. As daito, his mindset became disheartened. Why? Because he wasn't part of it. His tribe, his people weren't included in that moment. Amar lo Akash Baruch Hu, God said back to Aaron, hearing Aaron's discouragement, Chayech shalcha gedola mishalachem. Your role, your part is greater than their part. She'ata madlik umetiv et hanerot. For you, light and take care of the lights every day, and that theirs is just a one-time. They bring a sacrifice, but you, for all of eternity, get to light the menorah and continue to bring the light of the menorah forward, and that's the case. So this is a fascinating Rashi. I'll tell you the truth. As a parent, it bothers me a lot. Right? Aaron is jealous of the other Nesiim, of the other leaders of the tribes. They all get 12. They all get to bring 12 of the exact same korban, right? Why do they bring exactly the same korban?
So one shouldn't be higher than the other.
So one shouldn't be higher there's a fascinating commentary in last week's Parsha, which we didn't get to talk about last week, by the Balaturim, that takes every one of these sacrifices and it describes the gematria of the numbers, why for each tribe it was actually individually significant as well, which is an important message, I think, in general for us, right? We all have the same 613 mitzvot. We all say daven the same prayers. We're all in the same prayer book. And that's an important unifying factor. But at the same time, how we give voice to those mitzvot, how we give voice to those words are going to be different. And it's our job to, animate those words individually and bring our own life experience, our own needs, our own process to that. And that's kind of what we see with Nisim, they model for us as well. But so Aaron sees this and then he gets jealous and he says, he becomes, disheartened, weakened. And God says, right? What does God say? What would you say to your kid after they get one of your kids get a special treat and the other one didn't, or someone got something special and they didn't? What would you tell them? What would you tell a friend? You would say, everyone gets what they get, right? Right? Kids get what they need. People get what they need, right? All of a sudden, what does God say? God says, you know what, Aaron? Well, you're going to get something even better. It's going to be even more grand, more special, more than anything else. Don't worry, right? It's an odd response, right? Any thoughts? Am I wrong? Helen, if your grandchildren came to you and they said, how come you got this person got a special treat and they didn't? The answer is people get what they need. They're different, different people get different things.
Well, or your turn will come. This time it's this one's turn. Next time it'll be your turn.
Exactly.
Right. But you'll come, don't worry, yours is going to be better.
No. You try to be very even-handed.
Debbie, you're muted.
No, you don't. You don't say that. Everyone is supposed to, in certain ways, be equal. So you don't say yours is going to be better. You're just going to say that you're going to get yours, and it's going to be special for you.
So I've been thinking a lot about this midrash for this reason. It's Rashi's coining a midrash, obviously, a very famous midrash. And I can give you one of the answers I've seen recently. You can decide whether you like it. I'm still trying to formulate a good answer for this question on the midrash. We don't just take things at face value. So I saw it, I think, in the Sfat Emet, which is the first Ger Rebbe, where he writes that that's true in our physical lives, that we have to learn Ezu Asher Someach Bechalko, right? Who is considered rich? What is the trait that we should seek after? Someone who's happy with their lot, right? That is what we aspire to. That's true in the physical, material realm. When it comes to spirituality, we want to encourage spiritual ambition. We want to encourage people to be thirsty. We want to encourage people to reach out and want more and desire more. And so God is welcoming our own spiritual ambition. Aaron's not saying, I want to be front and center. I want, our own day, just like you have Nachshon Day and El Yetzor Day and all these other days. Aaron wants an opportunity to contribute seriously. And therefore, God sees that and says, don't worry, you're also, that spiritual ambition will create an opportunity that's even greater than the people who have it coming to them. Right? That's one answer. And part of there's an expression in the Talmud, there's a Talmudic expression, Kinas Sofrim, the jealousy among scholars, Tarbe Chachma, creates more, increases wisdom. That's one understanding. I will share that my teacher, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, used to say, Kinas Sofrim Tarbe Chachma, that jealousy among scholars raises wisdom and lots of kinna and lots of jealousy. That even in the spiritual realm, it's sometimes hard to divide, and that type of challenge, even if you try to make it l'shem shamayim, you make it for heavenly pursuit, doesn't always work out that way and can have a negative impact on your personal character. Rabbi Soloveitchik, I saw, writes and really casts this differently. Casts Aaron as the every Jew, that Aaron's representative of the humble Jew who's watching during the inauguration of the temple and says, I want a part, but I'm not a big hotshot leader of the Jewish people. So what am I going to be able to do? And God says, don't worry, you'll be able to, and promises that this will be a moment of for the entire people forever, the lighting of the menorah, and also a symbol and a nod towards Hanukkah, which is the representation that we all get to light the menorah. That understanding far outlasts and coincides with the completion of the building of the Mishkan, and is connected to this idea. And really, Rabbi Soloveitchik makes this much more about, class distinction, and how, the simple Jew who might feel excluded really has the opportunity to grow to the highest places. And that is the message of Hanukkah. He gave that in a Hanukkah lecture many, many years ago. That might be another answer, but just something to think about. This is a famous Rashi that gives an interesting answer to a question that is somewhat clear in the text. Why are we talking about the menorah? It's because Aaron felt, disempowered because he wasn't included. And so Aaron gets this prize of the menorah. And it makes us think about, both being spiritually ambitious, but recognizing that even spiritual ambition, like everything else, if not done properly and not done correctly, can lead to human traits that are less than desirable. So that's, I guess, where I'm coming down on this midrash right now. And if you have some ideas, I'd love to discuss them further with you. Continuing on. So why are the Levites chosen, right? Why are the Levites chosen?
They were the only tribe that apparently didn't participate in the Egel.
Right. And who was supposed to be chosen?
The Bechorim.
Right. And they get excluded because they participate in the Egel, right? I'm just filling in your circle here. So the Chizkuni, the 13th century French commentary, has a very different approach to that. And in this week's Parsha, we see this comparison of that there were the Leviim were consecrated, and the Kach et HaLeviim tacha ko b'chor, that God has substituted the Levites instead of the firstborns. Why? So the Chizkuni gives a very different answer. She'im hayu kol ha-b'chorim, if all the firstborns, the translations from Sepharia, I honestly haven't read it through, so I hope it's good, but I'm going to read it and do my own translation, but it's there from Sepharia. Im hayu kol ha-b'chorim ovdim, if all the firstborns were the workers in the Beit Mikdash, yeh bahem negef, there would be a plague against them. Negef is the punishment for not serving in the Beit Mikdash appropriately. Shaharei aviv shel zeh habachor shema lo haya bachor, because this one's father was not a bachor, was not a firstborn, but clearly his firstborn son is a firstborn, and so you would have a lack of experience. Imagine, right, you not being a firstborn. My father is not a firstborn. No, my father is the firstborn. My grandfather was not the firstborn. So imagine my father gets taken to work in the temple. No one in his family has any understanding of what that means. No one's to train him. And then he makes a mistake, and there's a plague against them, right? Shezeh habachor, shema lo haya bachor, velo aviv bachor, velo hergo ba'avoda. And they're not familiar with the task. Who's going to teach them what to do? Sheyavo lavod lo yiyeh baki v'nizhar bahem. And he won't be an expert and careful with the duties that he would need to perform in the temple. Sorry?
There are Levium that are firstborn.
No, but, one second. This is before the Levium. Before we get to the Levite paradigm. I know in the Luger home, they are very strong on the Levites Cohens, even though they come to it second generation.
Right.
Right? So this is before. This is in a proto-Levi world, before we've made Levium. In the
Special.
first model,
Okay.
you have the
Gotcha.
Bechor. So what happens?
Gotcha.
The firstborn of a family, right? Aiden Arasti is the firstborn, right? Eli's not the firstborn, right?
Correct.
Eli and Rena's not the firstborn. right?
Correct.
So, and Steve the firstborn? No,
No.
right? So that's 3 generations that no one in his immediate family have firstborn. So he has no training to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, right? And what's going to happen?
Right.
He's going to get there. He's not going to have the training, and God forbid, he's not going to do something correctly, and that can have serious consequences. So what
Right.
happens? God changes the model. God decides that the best way to train and pass on the tradition of how to serve in the temple is to pass it from father to son, generation to generation, within the same families, right?
Right.
Kohen families, they would pass from generation to generation. They would train the Kohen what to do. They would train the Levite. The Levi would know from his father and from his grandfather and his uncles and his family. What does it mean to be a Levi? What does it mean to eat Meiser? What does it mean to play those roles? That was part of his family's DNA. And therefore, there's this change, at least according to Chizkuni, to trade from a firstborn system to a hereditary system to pass on this tradition, right? So that's a fascinating, just new model of thinking about the Kohen and the Levi and why that's important. Not because they sat out, but, or maybe in addition, right? Lee, we could put these together. God wanted to change the Bechor model because we were worried educationally it wouldn't work. Who then do you choose? People that are appropriate. But why we choose and who we choose might not be the same. But this is a fascinating model much more when we talk about education, right? About passing on education, about making sure, a statement about Jewish education, a statement about how we pass on our tradition from one generation to the next, recognizing that we can't deputize other people to do that, but it needs to come from the home. I think this Chizkuni yells Jewish education, and particularly internal Jewish education in the community. Yeah, Lee.
Regarding the training, Rabbi, I seem to remember that the Levium didn't actually officially start to work until they were 30, but they actually started training many years before that.
And who trained them?
But the same could have been true of the firstborn.
It's true, but I think it's more than that, because you have how to eat truma, how to eat meiser, how to eat the tithes, which needs to be eaten in certain types of holiness, right? Those begin earlier on. And there are households that need to think about how that works. And part of this is that maybe that training wasn't enough. We wanted to train them, a lifelong habits of purity, of making sure that you're sensitive to certain, ways that habits. I think, Corona is a great example for these things, which is why we learned that tractate of Mishnah that I quoted before. There's a concept of Tzumas Yadayim, that your hands are ritually impure, because we're not always sure where your hands are, right? Hands wander. If you could tell me everything your hands touched in the last 2 hours, right, in your house, right, it's hard to think about it, right? Your hands are in your pocket, your hands are here, your hands are there. Just think about now as we're trying to be more conscious about not touching our nose or our mouth and washing our hands, we realize that our culture just doesn't have that. And part of that training, of that consciousness, of space, of whatever, it's hard to get into the mindset of, even if you train for a couple years when you're 25, 30, right? But if it's embedded in your DNA from when you begin, so you remember better. I can just tell you personally from an experience, Kohanim can't go into cemeteries, right? And there are certain areas that you have to avoid. Miriam and I have been married for, thank God, more than 5 years, right? But still, it's a different, I've grown up with it my whole life, and it's front and center in my mind when I travel. And, it's not, now it's a little bit different for Miriam, but it's not front and center in my mind. I think there are times where people planning vacations don't always remember that. So I think that might be part of it also. That might be part of the Chizkuni's additional answer. All right, so let's move on. So that's the first. I find this Chizkuni fascinating in our Parsha. Changes the total way I think about Levium. Let's see. All right, one other gem that caught my eye. We're doing a potpourri of different thoughts now on the Parsha. we talk about the no, we'll skip this. Let's dig into a particular topic now, right? So there's so much to talk about the Parsha, but let's talk about the last part of the Parsha, which is the part of Miriam and Aaron and Moshe and that debate. What's going on there? And I can give it to you, I can show it to you in English and in Hebrew, but not on the same screen. Hold on. Anyone remind me of the story? What happens in our Parsha?
Miriam is talking to Aaron about Moshe separating himself from his wife.
Uh-huh. What
Okay,
happened?
and, God is not happy with that.
Right.
She gets tzarat.
Yeah, she ends up being punished with Sarat, is outside of the camp for a week
7-day delay.
after Moshe pleads with God to
Right.
give her and cure her.
So there are a lot of ways of interpreting the story. I want to read through this story and ask some questions, sort of like what we've done in the past where we've tried to see when we read Root and stuff like that, to ask some leading questions that we can try to be sensitive to the text. And then I will share, then we could talk about some answers, but in particular, one particular mahalach, one particular way of looking at the story that is probably unique and different than the way we look at it. All right, so we'll begin reading it. But to the bear Miriam, the Aaron bimoshe. Miriam and Aaron spoke bimoshe, right? So first of all, this bimoshe as opposed to al Moshe, that Miriam didn't speak about Moshe, but bimoshe, in Moshe, which is where we begin to hear that this is a negative against Moshe, right? It's a weird type of prefix that we would have in this. Alodot Isha kushit asher lakach ki isha kushit lakach. On the matter of the woman, of the Cushite woman that he married, for he married a Cushite woman. It doesn't say anything about splitting here or anything like that, right? That is the Midrash. Filling the text, and we'll see why the Midrash says that. But just off the bat, right, does this seem like a normal way of phrasing a verse?
No.
No. What's the weird thing here?
She's describing the woman and repeats it.
Right, so this is repetition. So if you look in the translation, this is from Sefaria also, they did a smart thing. What they wanted to say is, they talked about against Moshe because of the Cushite woman that he married, and then they use ki isha kushit lakach as a quotation, as if they're excerpting the sentence that Miriam said. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is very clever, and the way some of the commentaries understand it. Right? Now, how do we get to this idea that he's separated from her? Where does the Midrash get that?
I remember more of the Midrash, but I don't remember where he got it from.
Right. So look at this verse. This is where it comes from. Where in the verse? So the Midrash, and this is the beautiful thing about Midrash. Sometimes we read Midrashim, and we're like, it's a nice story, but does it have any bearing in the text? And we belittle it, but it's not true. Midrash reads the text with a super focus on language and the way the words are presented, and therefore is able to extrapolate a great deal of information based on that. So if you look, ki asher lakach, ki isha kushit lakach, what tense is lakach? Past tense. So the Midrash plays up on this double language of the verb of lakach in the past tense, that Moshe had married her. That the problem wasn't that Moshe married her, but that Moshe had married her and currently wasn't living in a state of marriage with her. Right? That's how the Midrash picks up on it. It's very sensitive to the language, in particular, double past verb of lakach, and that's the problem. Right? There are other ways of understanding this also, but let's read with that for a second, because I think it fits in. Vayomru, and they said, Harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem, halo gam banu diber vayishma Hashem. Right? And they said, so who said this?
They.
They.
Miriam and Aaron?
So this becomes an interesting question because it seems
There's
like
the Yom.
Miriam's the one who gets taken to task. Aaron
But it's-
also later on will amend a sin, will confess the sin, right? Aaron will say, "Al na tashet alinu chatat," don't hold us guilty, or please pardon the sin that we, plural, committed. And this is where, again, sensitive reading to the text, the Midrash says, Miriam spoke it, Aaron heard it. The difference between someone speaking Lashon Hara and hearing Lashon Hara is negligible, right? Those who hear Lashon Hara is just as guilty, right? And so that's where, again, the sensitive reading to the text here and in some of the later verses build that parallel. Halo gam banu diber Hashem. God also spoke to us. When did God speak to Miriam? Zoom still hasn't put in the Zoom waiting music that I've been asking them for. When did Miriam speak to when did Aaron speak to God? So that's all over the place, right? We know Aaron spoke to God. Check. When did Miriam speak to God? We'll come back
Miriam,
to it. Yeah.
Miriam is referred to as a Navi in Chumash, right?
Yeah.
Right. But Tikach Miriam HaNeviah. Yeah.
Okay, so that
So
presumes.
back when she saved Moshe, way back when.
When
God speak to her?
what'd she do?
She runs back to her mother to ask her if she wants to be the.
Well, she goes up to
nurse.
the Pharaoh's
Yeah,
daughter.
she goes to.
But that's not
Pharaoh's
speaking to God.
daughter. Yeah, I was
Debbie, I
gonna
think
say
you're
that.
referring to
but-
something else, right?
No, before that.
Right. What is that? What's it?
So when she went to her parents and said, why are you not doing what you're supposed to do? You're worse than Paro.
Right. So that's not in the Torah, but we will see that I believe that part of where the Midrash gets that story from is part of where the Midrash gets strength for that story is right over here. Maybe. But I think the simple answer is Miriam HaNeviah. Clearly, she's a prophetess if she's called that. And so we know that that's why she spoke. But I think, Debbie, your point is very important. So what happens? God, all of a sudden the Torah interjects here as if the Torah needs to protect Moshe. It's fascinating. It can't even wait for God to protect Moshe. We get Vayish Moshe Anav Me'od Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adama. Moshe is the most humble of everyone. Vayomer Hashem Pitom. God speaks to Moses immediately. You can almost imagine this being dictated to Moshe and how uncomfortable he is writing this, right? Right. I just, you imagine this being transcribed. Moshe speaks, all of a sudden God speaks to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Su Shloshem El Oa Moed, go meet by the tent of meeting, and they all went, right? God comes and then defends Moshe. We're not going to get through right now what they are. That Moshe's prophecy is quantitative and qualitatively better than Miriam and Aaron, right? Which is sort of an answer to Miriam's gripe, right? Right, Miriam's gripe, as we're understanding it now, is they're also prophets. They don't have to separate from their wives. Or spouses. Why is Moshe have to be any different? It's not appropriate what he's doing. And so God's answer to that is no, you're wrong. And you have to realize why you're wrong, that there's a difference. And what happens? Aaron, V'anan sar me'ala ohel, the cloud shifts from on top of the tent. I'm right over here where the red is right now. Vehi Miriam mitzorat kashaleg. Miriam has mitzora, has saras. Vayiven Aaron el Miriam v'hine mitzorat. Right, and Aaron turns to Miriam, and she is a mitzora. This end of this language over here, didn't we just know she was a mitzora? Right, plays into what we've read already in Achrimot in Tazria Mitzora, that before you formally become a mitzora, who's the only person that can formally make someone a mitzora? Is the Kohen. The Kohen needs to see it and needs to point to it. It's actually a fascinating lesson that if you are being, what the Mitzorah gets tzarat because they judge other people, according to what we're understanding here, right? So what happens here? You need to be judged. And so Miriam gets judged by Aaron, and she is a Mitzorah, right? And Aaron says, "Vayomer Aaron el Moshe." Moshe says to Aaron, Aaron says to Moshe, "Bi Adoni, please, my master, al nat hashet aleinu chatat asher no'an v'sher chatat." Please, Moshe. It's fascinating because normally we assume this is referring. We use it in our liturgy to speak to God, but it's really Aaron pleading with Moshe, right? Please, I'm just switching down to the English for everyone. Please, God, right? Don't hold us guilty for this. Please forgive us for this moment. And then Moshe says, right? Davins calls out to God and davins. El na rafan Allah. God, please forgive her. Please,
Heal her.
Heal her. Thank you. Please heal her. And God says to Moshe, "V'avia yarok yarak bifaneha halo tikalem shivat yamim." If her father spit in her face, would she not be closed for 7 days? She should tisager shivat yamim. She should be closed for 7 days outside the camp, and then she should ta'asef. She could be gathered in to the camp. She should sit out the time like she's a tzarat. The inference of this is that she is healed from the tzarat right away, but she needs to wait now the 7 days outside the camp. So what's going on here? Right? What does this mean? If her father spit in her face, she would be closed for 7 days?
God's not willing to forgive her without having her have some sort of ramification of her.
100%. But so what? How do you explain this line? The avia yarok. It's not a line that we see anywhere else in the Torah. What is this metaphor? And I'll bring it back to English so you can see it, right? If her father spat in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Where is that? So there are a lot of answers to this section, but I want to pull out a particular one, which I think is very interesting. So when did Miriam speak to God, Debbie?
Back when...
Right. She's a whole 5-year-old, right?
Right.
And her parents get the decrees from Paro.
Right, and they decide to separate.
And Miriam says, no, you're going to have a child that will be the savior of the Jewish people, and you're worse than Paro. Paro, right? Right. This sounds like the Haggadah, right? Paro only destined to kill the males, and you're killing everyone. And what happens? The Midrash describes that Amram, her father, was the leader of the people, and so everyone's following her father. Says, "You're right, Miriam. You're right." And your prophecy, you're right. Your prophecy is right, right? And what happens? They have Moshe, and there's a ray of light, and they're all ecstatic. But what happens after 3 months?
I heard you.
What?
Sorry, I was saying something to Cindy.
Oh. What happens after 3 months? Moshe, they have to hide him.
Get
rid of him, right? There's no salvation. So what happens? Her father says, "You're wrong." And what do we read? We read that Miriam is virtuous, that she watches the baby get put in the river, but sav achoso mirachok, that she stands from a distance. And the Midrash says she's not watching from a distance because she's keeping distance from the baby. She's watching from a distance because she was pushed out of her family. They were angry at her. You convinced us to do this. You were wrong. She was pushed out for 7 days. Avia yarok yarak b'fanah. Amram spit in her face and sent her away, cast her out, right? Now, why is Miriam, Moshe's arch defender, speaking badly about Moshe, right? What is she speaking about? She's speaking about leadership couples separating because of their leadership roles, right? Isn't this her prophecy all along? This is her soapbox. This is Miriam's issue, right? Her parents, who are the leaders of the people there, separated, and all the people separated, and she had a prophecy that was a mistake, and she convinced her parents to get back together, And now she's watching her brother do the same thing, right? So all of a sudden now we understand where Miriam's coming from much more, right? Miriam is projecting forward the prophecy which Shireh had. Now, we'll get
Why
to her.
was he separating though?
Clearly that was what was required of him, right? As God responds, his higher level of prophecy requires that
He be on his
trade-off,
own.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, that seems to be the answer. The answer is clear that this was required, not that he was doing something foolish, right? God doesn't even come and say, even though Moshe's making a mistake, it's not nice to speak Lashon Hara. God says you're wrong, right? So first of all, let's answer the question about the punishments, right? Her father spit in her face. This might be an allusion based on the Midrash and many of the commentaries here to that moment where even though she was right, she had to sit in shame for 7 days. Now you've challenged God, you've challenged Moshe, and you were wrong. You have to at least sit for 7 days. The honor of God, the respect of God and Moshe requires no less. Right? So that's one way of understanding it. I think the other point that's being brought to Miriam, which is really a lesson in general, is this notion of judging and supplanting and transposing one life experience to another life experience. I mean, just because a prophecy was good 80 years ago in Egypt doesn't mean it was good right now in the desert, right? Just because a prophecy made sense for her parents doesn't mean she has the right to stick it on Moshe and then complain about him, right? Part of, I think, the message here is that Miriam is the punishment is trying to show or highlight that her flaw is that she was trying to conflate the two stories. And at least that's the way the Midrash makes it out. The Midrash understands that what trying Miriam is this prophecy, which now we understand Miriam is not this bad actor that all of a sudden had it out for her brother, but someone who was legitimately not only worried for the situation, but acting upon God's word, although it's in a different context and in a different place and 80 years old. And then presenting forward this notion of that there are times where there are things that are relevant and times that aren't. I can just share, personally, sometimes you talk to people and you hear them just fill everyone else's situation with their own life experience. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes that's really hurtful, right? We have there's a Mishnah, al tadun chavercha ad shetagia lemkoma. Don't judge your friend until you come to his place. So there's a famous quote of the Sfat Emet, which I actually never see inside, but Dr. Pelkovitz talks about all the time. Don't judge your friend until he comes to her place. And then the Sfat Emet adds, Vida she'iv shar legia lemkoma, and know that there's no way ever to reach their place. I mean, you can't ever really put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? As the English metaphor, axiom is, right? Don't judge a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes, and then you're a mile away and you have their shoes, right? So the idea here is the same, meaning Miriam is taking one circumstances and applying it, and in some ways, this is a model of divine punishment that we see all the time. Mida keneged mida, right? An act for an act. Miriam is using an old model to judge Moshe inappropriately. So God is now using the model of what her father did to her, even though she was right at that time, to respond this way. And I think that is part of one of the readings behind this story. So we're going to stop here. We've talked about...
I was just curious, why is it emphasized that he took a Cushite woman, their sister-in-law? They didn't refer to her by name.
So the issue that I talked about focuses on the lakach. The issue of Cushite might present a different issue. According to some of the Midrashim, in those times, Cushite women were very attractive. And so this is referring to, Moshe's inappropriate behavior with his wife that was very attractive. So hold on a second.